The quiet of the sunroom shattered with a single bark. In an instant, the blind German shepherd was on his feet, pressing his body against a tilting wheelchair. The little boy's hand still reaching for a falling book. Papers scattered, Emily's heart pounded, and in the doorway the billionaire father froze, watching the dog protect his son with a precision born not from sight, but from love. In that moment, fear gave way to something he thought he'd lost forever: trust. The late afternoon sky over Cedar Falls, Vermont, was heavy with the muted gold of early autumn. A thin mist clung to the rolling hills beyond the town, and the air carried the faint bite of approaching winter. The cobblestone streets were dotted with russet and crimson leaves, shuffling in small whirlwinds whenever the breeze slid between the buildings. Emily Carter walked with her collar pulled tight, her breath visible in pale wisps, toward the northern edge of town, where Whitaker House stood like an old sentinel above the river bend. Emily Carter, 28, was of medium height. With warm chestnut-brown hair, she often pulled into a low ponytail, a few strands always escaping to frame her heart-shaped face. Her hazel eyes, some days green, some days gold, had a softness that belied the quiet resilience she carried. Life had demanded much from her early. The collapse of her family's small farm, her mother's lingering illness, and her younger brother Jake's education had all taken precedence over her own dreams. She was practical, hard-working, and instinctively gentle, though beneath that gentleness lay a stubborn streak. She had been told Whitaker House was a marvel of architecture, 3 stories of whitewashed stone, with slate roofing and tall, mullioned windows. But as Emily crossed the long, winding driveway bordered by bare maple trees, the building came into view, and she understood why the townsfolk spoke of it in half-whispers. The structure was beautiful, yes, but not in a welcoming way. Its symmetry was too precise, its edges too sharp. Even from a distance, it exuded an air of restraint, as though warmth had been designed out of it. At the foot of the grand steps, she paused. The massive wooden front door loomed before her, carved with intricate patterns that felt more like a crest than decoration. The brass knocker was cold under her fingers, and the sound it made was low, almost solemn. The door opened to reveal a tall man in his mid-30s. This was James Whitaker. He stood just over 6 feet, lean but broad-shouldered, with dark blonde hair swept neatly back, and the kind of posture that seemed practiced over years of commanding rooms. His slate-gray eyes assessed her quickly, not with rudeness, but with a certain guarded calculation. James was dressed in a crisp charcoal suit despite the casual hour, and there was something in his expression that hinted at both fatigue and unyielding control. Widowed young, James had poured his energy into managing his business empire and protecting his son, though protection in his case often meant isolation. "Miss Carter," he said, voice low and even, "you're right on time." Inside, the air was warmer, but somehow heavier. The foyer was vast, its marble floor so polished it mirrored the crystal chandelier overhead. The walls were lined with oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors, and the scent of lemon polish lingered faintly in the air. Every object was placed with mathematical precision, too perfect to feel lived in. James led her into a sunroom at the far end of the ground floor. Here, in a large wingback chair by the window, sat a boy of about 5. Ethan Whitaker was small for his age, with fine, pale hair that fell across his forehead, and large blue-gray eyes that seemed to take in everything without offering anything back. He did not look up as they approached, his gaze fixed on the garden beyond the glass. A soft wool blanket covered his legs, and next to him lay a German shepherd, large, powerful even in stillness. "This is Ethan," James said, his tone softening just slightly. "And that's Bailey." Bailey, the German shepherd, was 7 years old. Once a therapy dog for James's late wife during her illness, Bailey had lost his sight in a car accident 2 years earlier. Now, his eyes were a cloudy blue, hidden beneath a neatly tied white blindfold that prevented further irritation. Despite his disability, his ears twitched at every sound, and there was a quiet dignity in the way he rested, head on his paws, beside the boy. Ethan reached out absently and let his small hand rest on Bailey's back. The boy's other hand gripped the armrest, knuckles pale. He did not acknowledge Emily's presence, though Bailey turned his head slightly toward her, nostrils flaring to catch her scent. Emily crouched to the dog's level. "Hello, Bailey," she said softly, careful not to reach out without invitation. Bailey's tail thumped once against the carpet, slow, deliberate, but he stayed where he was. James observed this silently, his arms crossed. "Ethan doesn't take to strangers easily," he said. "I'll expect you to respect his space, and Bailey's." The next hour was a quiet tour of the house, though tour felt generous. James showed her the kitchen, immaculate, barely used, the playroom, filled with untouched toys, and her quarters, a small but comfortable room on the second floor with a view of the river. In each space, Emily noticed the same absence. No signs of a child's daily chaos, no traces of spontaneous laughter. It was as though the house had been frozen in a moment years ago and never thawed. Back in the sunroom, she saw Ethan in the same chair, Bailey in the same spot. Outside, the garden was littered with fallen leaves that no one had bothered to rake. Emily felt the weight of something unspoken pressing in from all sides. This was not simply a quiet house. It was a sealed one. She met James's eyes. "I understand my duties," she said, though her voice was softer now. "I'll take care of him." James gave a brief nod. "Good. Just remember, routine is important here. No unnecessary changes, no surprises." Emily glanced at Ethan once more, at Bailey's calm but watchful stillness, and she thought of the invisible wall between them. Not a wall of stone, but of grief, fear, and habit. She didn't yet know how she would reach them, but she felt, with a certainty she couldn't explain, that she must try. Outside, the wind rose, scattering another flurry of red leaves across the wide lawn. The great wooden door of Whitaker House closed behind her first day inside, and with it, Emily stepped into a place where beauty was shadowed by silence, and where the heart of a family beat quietly behind walls no one dared to touch. Morning in Cedar Falls began with a pale sun climbing slowly above the horizon, its warmth muted by the cool bite of autumn air. From her small room in Whitaker House, Emily Carter watched thin veils of mist drift along the riverbank beyond the back lawn. The house was as still as it had been the evening before. No sounds of footsteps, no clatter of breakfast, only the muffled hum of the central heating. She dressed in a soft gray sweater and jeans, tying her hair back loosely, determined to try again with Ethan. Her first stop was the kitchen, where she found Mrs. Irene Harper already at work. Irene, the housekeeper and cook, was a woman in her late 50s with a sturdy build and cropped silver hair that curled naturally around her face. She wore a starched apron over a simple navy dress and had an efficient, no-nonsense air, though her dark eyes softened when she spoke. Years earlier, she'd been a single mother working double shifts in a diner to raise her children, a past that made her fiercely practical and sometimes wary of dreamers. Still, she greeted Emily with a brief but genuine smile. "Mr. Whitaker left early for the city," Irene said, sliding a plate of toast toward her. "It'll just be you, Ethan, and Bailey this morning. He likes the sunroom." Emily thanked her and carried a small tray with tea, toast, and a bowl of oatmeal toward the sunroom. The room was flooded with pale light through its wide windows, the kind that brightened every speck of dust in the air. Ethan sat curled in the same wingback chair as yesterday, legs tucked under the blanket. Bailey lay beside him in his usual sphinx-like pose, the white blindfold stark against his dark fur. "Good morning, Ethan," Emily said, setting the tray on a low table. She didn't expect a reply, but hoped for a glance. None came. Instead, the boy's gaze stayed fixed on the garden, where a few yellow leaves still clung stubbornly to a birch tree. She sat cross-legged on the floor near Bailey, careful to keep her distance from Ethan. From her tote bag, she drew out a worn hardcover, The Tale of Peter Rabbit. She began reading aloud, her voice low and steady, adding small flourishes in tone when describing Peter's mischief. Bailey shifted slightly, ears flicking toward her voice, and she noticed Ethan's eyes moving from the window to the book, if only for a moment. Over the next days, she repeated the ritual, stories in the morning, soft humming in the afternoon, occasionally rolling a small wooden car along the carpet near Bailey. She never asked Ethan to join, never pushed. She simply let him see her, and Bailey, existing without demand. By Thursday, Emily decided to bring in reinforcements. That afternoon, her 17-year-old brother Jake arrived after school, his sketchbook tucked under one arm. Jake Carter was tall and lanky, with the easy slouch of someone who'd grown too quickly in the past year. His brown hair was perpetually messy, and there was a smudge of graphite on his cheek. Jake had always been quiet but kind, an observer rather than a talker, and art had been his way of speaking since childhood. "Don't crowd him," Emily whispered at the sunroom door. Jake nodded, then stepped inside, setting his sketchbook on the carpet and flipping it open. Without looking directly at Ethan, he began sketching Bailey, capturing the elegant line of the dog's muzzle, the folds of the blindfold, the powerful front paws. The sound of pencil on paper was soft, rhythmic. Bailey's ears twitched. Ethan's gaze flickered from the window to Jake's hands. 10 minutes passed before Jake quietly tore a page from the sketchbook and slid it, face up, toward the boy. The drawing was simple, but alive, every line carrying the calm strength of the dog beside him. Ethan looked at the paper. His small hand lifted slowly from the blanket and touched the corner of the page, tracing the outline of Bailey's head with one fingertip. He didn't speak, but the touch was deliberate, almost reverent. Bailey responded with a low, contented huff, tilting his head toward Jake's chuckle. Emily caught the subtle change. The boy's eyes had light in them now, faint but real, as if a shutter had cracked open. They didn't press further. Jake closed his sketchbook, offered Ethan a quiet, "See you next time," and left the drawing on the arm of the chair. As Emily walked him out, she felt a small, cautious swell of hope. The connection was fragile, but it was there. That evening, as she passed the sunroom on her way upstairs, she paused. Ethan was still in his chair, Bailey beside him. The drawing lay on his lap now, and his thumb moved slowly along the paper's edge. Emily smiled to herself. Somewhere beyond the walls of Whitaker House, the river carried the last light of the day toward the horizon, and for the first time since she had arrived, Emily thought she could see its reflection in a pair of closed eyes beginning to open. The next morning broke with a sky the color of pewter, a steady drizzle blurring the line between the hills and the river in the distance. Whitaker House seemed even quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that made Emily aware of her own footsteps on the polished floors. She had settled into a rhythm over the past week, reading in the mornings, gentle conversation in the afternoons, Jake visiting when he could. But she was learning that each small gain with Ethan was like stepping onto thin ice. Any sudden movement could crack it. She found Ethan in the library that day, sitting in a deep leather armchair beside the unlit fireplace. The library was a cavernous room, paneled in dark oak, smelling faintly of old paper and lemon oil. Bailey lay stretched out on a rug, patterned with faded reds and blues, his ears angled toward every sound. Outside, the rain tapped a steady rhythm on the tall windows. Emily had brought a small music box, a gift from her grandmother years ago. It was a simple wooden thing, its lid etched with a carved meadow scene. She wound the key and set it on the table near Ethan. The tune, a soft, lilting lullaby, filled the room. Ethan's gaze shifted toward the sound, and for the first time since she had arrived, Emily saw his lips curve in the faintest smile. She began to hum along, letting her voice blend with the melody. Ethan's eyes met hers for a fleeting moment, and she felt a small rush of warmth at the connection. But the moment broke when the heavy door swung open. James stood in the doorway, his coat still damp from the rain, an umbrella in one hand. His gaze swept the room, landing on Emily, then on Ethan. His jaw tightened. "Miss Carter," he said evenly, stepping inside. "I told you, no unnecessary stimuli. Dr. Morrison's instructions are clear. Sudden changes can—" Emily straightened but kept her tone calm. "It's a lullaby, Mr. Whitaker." He was smiling. "That has to mean something." James's eyes cooled. "It means nothing if it risks destabilizing him. We follow the plan. That's why you're here." The music box wound down to silence. Ethan's gaze fell to his lap. The small spark Emily had seen faded. At that moment, Jake appeared in the doorway, his hair plastered to his forehead from the rain, holding a sketch pad under his jacket. He had come directly from school, cheeks flushed from the cold. Taking in the tension, he raised his brows slightly. "What happened?" he asked, his voice quiet but steady. "Nothing you need to concern yourself with," James replied, already turning toward the door. Jake didn't move. "You know," he said after a pause. Sometimes it's the adults who are the most afraid, not the kids. The words hung in the air, heavier than the rain outside. James glanced at him, the faintest flicker of something, anger, maybe, or recognition, passing over his features before he left the room without another word. The silence that followed was thick. Bailey shifted, rising slowly to his feet. His movements were careful, deliberate, each step a measured placement of paw to rug. Without hesitation, the dog positioned himself directly between Emily and the closed door, his body a living barrier. His head turned slightly toward her, the white blindfold stark against his fur, as if to anchor her in place. Emily sank into the chair opposite Ethan. "Well," she murmured to Jake, "I guess that's one way to end a song." Jake smirked faintly but said nothing, moving to sit on the floor beside Bailey. He reached out a hand, letting the dog sniff it before resting his palm on the shepherd's neck. Bailey leaned into the touch, his breathing slow and steady, grounding the moment. Later that evening, as Emily prepared tea in the kitchen, Irene Harper returned from her afternoon errands, shaking the rain from her umbrella. "I passed Mr. Whitaker on the drive," she said, hanging her coat. "He looked like a man chewing on something bitter." Emily smiled without humor. "I might have been the reason." Irene gave her a knowing look. "That man's built a wall around himself so high, I doubt even he remembers what's on the other side. Don't take it personal." But Emily did take it personally, not as an insult, but as a challenge. She thought of Ethan's fleeting smile, of Bailey's instinctive step toward her, of Jake's quiet defiance. The wall might be high, but walls had doors, and doors could be opened. She just needed to find the key. Outside, the rain continued to fall, wrapping Whitaker House in a sound both soothing and relentless, like time itself, pressing forward whether anyone was ready or not. The wind had been restless all afternoon, sweeping through the bare branches of the maples and rattling the shutters of Whitaker House. By early evening, the air carried the metallic scent of rain, and the clouds above Cedar Falls had gathered into a dense, unbroken mass. Inside, Emily was in the sunroom, stacking a small pile of picture books on the low table near Ethan's chair. The boy sat with his blanket tucked neatly around him, Bailey resting beside him, with his head on his front paws. Jake was sprawled on the rug, sketching the outline of the garden as it appeared through the rain-flecked glass. It happened so quickly, Emily almost didn't have time to react. Ethan reached for a book that had slipped toward the edge of the table. The movement tipped his balance in the chair, and his small body pitched sideways. Before Emily could cross the space, Bailey was on his feet, barking sharply, a deep, resonant sound that filled the room. The dog pressed his shoulder into Ethan's side, steadying him until Emily could grasp the boy and set him upright again. Ethan's eyes were wide, but he didn't cry. Instead, he reached for Bailey's neck with both arms, holding on as though the dog were the only solid thing in the room. James appeared in the doorway at that moment, his voice tight. "What happened?" Emily, still kneeling beside the chair, looked up. He nearly fell. Bailey caught him. James's gaze moved from his son to the dog, and something unguarded flickered across his face. For the first time, his voice lost its edge. "Good boy, Bailey," he said quietly. Dinner that night was uneventful, but the storm outside grew more insistent, the wind whistling through the chimney and a rain drumming against the roof. Just after 8, a sharp crack of thunder rattled the window panes, and the house went dark. The sudden loss of the overhead lights left the room in a strange, echoing silence. Irene Harper was the first to move, her voice steady in the gloom. "I'll find the candles. Matches are in the kitchen drawer." Within minutes, she had set several thick candles in the center of the dining table, their golden light softening the edges of the room. Emily brought Ethan into the dining room, Bailey padding close beside them. Jake appeared with a blanket draped over his shoulders, hair sticking up in several directions from the static of the storm. James entered last, carrying a flashlight that he clicked off once he saw the candles. Without his usual sharp lines of authority drawn by bright light and rigid posture, he seemed almost different. Less the unshakable master of the house, more a man caught in the same night as everyone else. They gathered around the table, the flicker of the candles casting gentle shadows on their faces. Ethan sat between Emily and James, Bailey lying under the table with his chin resting on Emily's foot. Jake passed around mugs of tea, the steam curling upward in thin tendrils. while the only sounds were the wind and the occasional crack of thunder. Then James spoke, his voice lower than Emily had ever heard it. "When Claire died," he began, his eyes fixed on the candle flame, "I thought if I controlled everything, every hour of the day, every detail, I could keep Ethan safe, that if I shut the world out, nothing else could hurt us." Emily listened without interrupting. "But I was wrong," he continued. "All I did was build walls so high that I trapped him inside with my fear. I thought I was protecting him, but maybe I was only protecting myself from losing him the way I lost her." The confession hung in the warm air between them. Ethan's hand moved slightly, brushing against his father's on the table. James didn't pull away. Emily's voice was gentle but firm. "You're not alone in this. We can help him together, step by step. You don't have to carry it by yourself." James looked at her then, truly looked, and nodded once. The storm outside raged on, but in the dining room, surrounded by the glow of the candles and the quiet company of those who had been strangers only weeks ago, something shifted. A wall had cracked, not all the way, but enough for the first threads of trust to slip through. Bailey gave a soft sigh from under the table, as if to mark the moment. The morning they left for the rehabilitation center dawned clear and cool, the storm having washed the Vermont sky into a bright, endless blue. Whitaker House was alive with quiet preparations. Irene packing a small basket of snacks, Jake rolling up his sketch pad into his backpack, and Emily checking Ethan's sweater buttons twice before helping him into the wheelchair. Bailey, sensing the unusual activity, stood patiently by the front door, the white blindfold contrasting sharply with his rich sable coat, tail giving slow, steady swishes across the polished floor. The center was in Maplewood, a town half an hour away, known for its sprawling pine groves and the crisp scent of sap in the air. As they drove, James kept his eyes on the road, but Emily noticed his hands tightening and loosening around the steering wheel, a subtle rhythm of nerves and hope. Ethan sat quietly beside her in the back seat, his hand resting on Bailey's neck. Jake, wedged next to the dog, looked out the window, occasionally sketching the passing landscape with quick strokes. When they arrived, the building was a low, modern structure with large windows that reflected the surrounding forest. They were met by Dr. Hannah Cole, a woman in her early 40s with sandy blonde hair cut to her jawline and kind, perceptive blue eyes. She was dressed in a navy fleece jacket and khaki pants, her handshake warm and steady. Years of working with children in recovery had given her a patience that was almost palpable. "Ethan," she said gently, kneeling to his eye level, "today we'll try something new, and Bailey, you're part of it too." The boy glanced at her, then at Bailey, his small fingers tightening slightly on the dog's fur. The first hour was slow. They began in the therapy garden, a paved path winding through raised beds of marigolds, lavender, and late-season chrysanthemums. Ethan's hands gripped the parallel bars firmly as Dr. Cole guided him through light stretches. James stood nearby, arms crossed but eyes soft, while Emily crouched at the far end of the bars, offering quiet encouragement. Jake sketched them from a shaded bench, occasionally glancing up to catch details, the tilt of Ethan's chin, the way Bailey's ears swiveled toward each voice. It was during a break that Dr. Cole suggested the outdoor exercise. "Sometimes, with the right motivation, children surprise themselves," she said, giving Bailey a small pat. Emily caught on immediately. She positioned herself a few steps away from Ethan, Bailey at her side. "Look who's waiting for you," she said with a gentle smile. Bailey gave a soft, eager whine, shifting his weight forward. Ethan's eyes flickered between the safety of the bars and the dog. Slowly, deliberately, he let go. His first step was uncertain, his body swaying, but Bailey's quiet whimper seemed to pull him forward. Another step, then another. The gravel crunched softly under his shoes. "Bailey," the word was barely a whisper, but it carried across the garden like the start of a song. Bailey's tail thumped hard against Emily's leg. By the time Ethan reached them, James had moved forward, his breath catching. Emily caught the boy as he stumbled into her arms, her own eyes wet. James knelt, wrapping them both in a fierce, trembling embrace. Bailey pressed his head against Ethan's knee, letting out a low, joyful rumble. On the drive back to Cedar Falls, the car felt different, lighter, as if some invisible weight had been lifted. Ethan dozed against Emily's shoulder, one hand still curled into Bailey's fur. James's profile in the driver's seat was softer than she had ever seen it, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror more than to the road. Over the following days, the change in the house was unmistakable. Laughter returned in small bursts, Ethan giggling at Bailey's attempts to nudge a ball across the rug, Jake humming while painting in the corner he had claimed as his studio in the sunroom. Emily filled vases with maple leaves in deep reds and golds, their color catching the afternoon light. It was on a crisp Saturday afternoon, the front lawn littered with scarlet and amber leaves, that James took Emily outside. Bailey trotted ahead, leading them toward the wide maple tree at the edge of the property. Ethan and Jake were in the distance, tossing a ball for Bailey, who, despite his blindness, chased it eagerly by sound alone. James stopped beneath the tree, his breath visible in the cool air. From his coat pocket, he drew a small velvet box. When he opened it, the ring inside gleamed with a simple elegance that matched his tone. "You brought light back into this house," he said, voice steady but thick with emotion. "You taught me what love looks like when it's patient and brave and unafraid to hope again. Emily, will you marry me, be Ethan's mother, and be our home?" Tears blurred her vision. She nodded, unable to find words, and James pulled her into an embrace that spoke for them both. When they returned inside, the smell of cinnamon tea filled the air. Ethan was curled on the rug before the fireplace, Bailey beside him, with his head resting on the boy's legs. Jake sat cross-legged nearby, adding the last strokes to a drawing of the scene. As the firelight danced across their faces, Emily realized the house no longer felt like a place of perfect, empty order. It was warm now, filled with voices, with stories, with the small, imperfect moments that made a life. Bailey stirred only to adjust his head slightly, his blind eyes hidden beneath the white cloth, his breathing slow and content. Around him, his family, because that's what they all were now, sat close, the world outside reduced to the soft hum of the wind through the maple leaves. Sometimes God's greatest miracles are not sudden flashes of light, but quiet changes in the heart that grow day by day. In this family's journey, love broke down walls, hope healed wounds, and faith gave them the courage to take each step forward. In our everyday lives, we may face our own closed doors and silent rooms, but when we choose patience, compassion, and trust in God's timing, He can turn even the darkest places into a home filled with light. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and subscribe for more stories of love and faith. May God bless you and your family with healing, strength, and joy. If you believe God still works miracles in our lives, write Amen in the comments.